The Big Small Business Show is proudly brought to you by Syca. Choose a difference maker, choose a chartered accountant.
The Big Small Business Show, proudly sponsored by MTN Business.
Welcome to the Big Small Business Show, the show for all our fantastic entrepreneurs out there. Now, there are two statistics I want to talk about right now. One is that 96% of businesses will fail within a 10-year period, most of them within the first 2 years. But there is another interesting statistic. Of all those entrepreneurs that fail, only 1.1 times comes back into the market. In other words, only 0.1% of all entrepreneurs who fail actually try again in South Africa. Now, that's a very different statistic to what goes on in the US, which is around 3.6 times. They will try 3.6 times before they finally give up. Now, to understand why people will try again is very important. And what goes on in the psychology of an entrepreneur, what goes on in their minds after they have failed, whether by their own volition, in other words, they put themselves into liquidation, life happens, or actually something else happens. Now, in studio with us today, we've got Rael Levitt. He is an amazing entrepreneur who has gone through the story himself. He has built up an empire, lost that empire, and then built up a second, even bigger empire. And I'm very privileged to have you in the studio with us. So welcome to the Big Small Business Show.
Oh, thank you, Allon.
So the story goes is that you founded Auction Alliance. I remember seeing you everywhere, hearing you everywhere. I mean, you were just becoming prolific in terms of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in South Africa. And then you were gone. So Rael, tell us about that big, big disaster.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue was that it was so sudden. Sometimes disasters happen, but they're in slow motion and you can see them coming. But this was completely out of the blue, which is in fact the story of the book I wrote, which was it was a tsunami. I mean, one moment it was sort of great conditions, and then suddenly there was this dramatic sort of media event, and it was so sudden. And that totally shocked me. And it made me completely immobile at that point. And so I really didn't know what to do. And it did take me a long time to sort of get back into the game again. But it was a very dramatic, traumatic event. It was a public pillaring. It wasn't just a business failure. It was a business failure on the front pages of newspapers.
So tell us, for those people who don't know what happened, maybe just in a précis, what happened?
Well, in essence, at that point, I was the largest auctioneer in South Africa. We had 60% of the entire market. And at an auction of a winery in Cape Town, a bidder was a very wealthy, prominent person, accused the company and me as the auctioneer of using a ghost bidder at that auction. And from that, it really just triggered into a huge media story. and so the closure of the business actually was a self-closure. It wasn't that we went bankrupt or I just saw this tsunami of negative media coming, and the business was really based on reputation. And I then decided just to shut it down. And so we literally, after the first article appeared, it probably was 2 months later, and this entire empire with offices throughout South Africa, hundreds of people working, we just voluntarily shut it down. And suddenly, at the age of 40, he was without a career, a job, a prospect, and probably more critically, I'd been doing it for so long. It was very much part of my personality, actually, my career. You know, it wasn't just a job which I went to or just a company. It was integral to who I'd been since I'd founded it at university, in fact.
So let's go back to the reputational side, because at that point, there's your point of view or your story and the media story. There's two stories. People must have, you worked out who was on your side at that time, who backed you, and were surprised at who backed you, who took Inverticom as your side, and who actually dumped you?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, the truth is I made like a series of mistakes. And the one big mistake was actually, I mean, obviously I had my side of the story, but I didn't verbalize it in the media because at that point, my lawyers and I hired multiple PR companies. And the biggest issue, I actually just wasn't used to negative publicity. It wasn't a case that it was like negative publicity all along. And then suddenly there was suddenly it happened. But this was completely dramatic and out of the blue. So to answer the question, sort of who was my friends and who weren't my friends. I think in essence what happened was I had a lot of corporate clients and and I understand that a lot of them distanced themselves from me immediately. I mean, some upset me because we had these relationships for years and years. But from their perspective, a lot of them would privately say to me, listen, we still love you and we like you, but unfortunately as a corporation, we can't be involved in the scandal. And it was a scandal. And it was a well-publicized scandal. But interestingly enough, the people who are the most negative sort of media and reaction came from people who had never done business with us, had never been to an auction, which was like ironic, and they didn't really understand it. I would say like the vast majority, if not all people who had transacted with us at auction lines for years actually weren't affected and weren't negative. But it was largely the bigger groups who just said, we can't be involved in this.
You spoke about freezing, in that moment.
Yes.
Just elaborate a little.
Well, I mean, it was, I was totally immobile and I didn't know whether to go left or right. And so, I mean, even at that time, I like physically lost my voice. I had no voice and I had no direction. And so it was like it was a shock. It was like a traumatic event where you actually don't know which way to go. And I was totally frozen and for quite a long period.
We're going to take a break now. And when we come back, I'm going to talk to Rael about how do you start to rebuild after you go through such a tsunami. Stay tuned.